an ordinary worker takes a virtual trip and then finds that his fantasy trip of being a spy is actually real. And next thing you know, he finds himself in the middle of a conspiracy that he has to unravel. That's basically the story of Total Recall. I'm John Chang with Dan Edmonds.
Hello there.
And I thought that the question that kind of came up this time around was basically how sometimes with these sci-fi movies, they've got to push the limits of believability, but after a certain point, it's definitely becomes a thing of that if we find it too hard to believe, if it's like too out there, then it loses us. But then meanwhile, like kind of if it doesn't push it enough, it's kind of like just becomes very much like, like kind of just another sci-fi flick and stuff. I was just kind of wondering what your thoughts are about, like kind of pushing the boundaries.
I don't know. I'm a big fan of sci-fi that goes weird and wacky and pushes the boundaries. I say the weirder the better, because I think actually a lot of predictions, definitely for the future, are often far more random and surreal than we could ever hope to predict. I mean, if you asked people in the 80s, do you know what, in like 20 years time, people are going to be obsessed with pictures of cats and find it hilarious to sort of digitally doctor pictures of cats, and it's going to be like the most thing that everyone watches. People have said, people who are watching high budget TV like the A-Team and Knight Rider think, what? How did this happen? It's like from getting from A to B is really hard to imagine, and that people will watch people watching people singing songs and things like this. It's just a totally sort of
surreal,
totally unexpected. Yeah, totally surreal. I mean, it's one of those things. It's like, we thought that kind of H.G. Wells and Aldous Huxley, which we'll get onto in a few weeks, were kind of like, laying the blueprints of what might happen to society. But it's really sort of William S. Burroughs who kind of was more the architect of the 21st century. We're really, flying off into uncharted territory, I think, in some ways. But
yeah, it's so weird sometimes how, things that seem really far-fetched, and then next thing you know, we are living that reality. I mean, on the mild side is like, things like technology, like iPads and, like things that kind of pretty much was envisioned by Star Trek and stuff. But the other extreme too, like kind of, I mean, who would have guessed, right? Be walking through your grocery store these days and everyone's wearing masks and stuff. And ironically, like kind of, I mean, we'll be talking about that in a couple of weeks with Watchmen and stuff. I mean, this show, this series came out, last year, and and the whole, Black Lives Matter thing happened stuff. I mean, it's just the thing that they kind of predicted. It's so bizarre, and yet what's even a double irony is the fact that like it's about an alternate reality, right? It's a show about how history takes a weird divergence and stuff from, kind of what we like our current history and stuff like that. And yet, like kind of in some ways, you wonder if maybe in fact we're in an alternate kind of reality for like kind of, where we would have been in 2020 and stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, taking a little jaunt down the metaphysical lane for a minute, as we're talking about Total Recall and pushing the boundaries of reality. I mean, there is this sense that we are collectively so much more aware and absorbing information, both sort of consciously and subconsciously, at a more kind of rapid rate, that it seems like these kind of prototypes of the future seem to be coming around more and more quickly. Like Snowpiercer is kind of seemed quite out there, and now is a very kind of current and right in the psyches of a lot of people. And likewise, like you said, Watchmen has gone within a year from something that seemed a little bit out there and left wing to something that's very kind of very on topic. So yeah, it is interesting. I mean, I've been listening to for whatever reason to a lot of Rupert Sheldrake at the moment, and he talks about this idea that memory doesn't actually exist in our heads. Our heads are just antennas that kind of tap into this consciousness. And in a funny sort of way, I kind of always think that the internet may actually be our working model of a kind of a zeitgeist in a way, or it may actually be like the working model without us realizing of how memory really works. because a personal computer is nothing more than our best attempt to recreate the human mind. So who knows, maybe the internet is actually our subconscious effort to recreate the hidden layers of society.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I've thought about the internet as being kind of like a cyborg, right? It has, on the user end, kind of human beings and stuff inputting into it and stuff. But then, overall, it's like this kind of mesh of, servers and, other hardware and stuff like that. This kind of just keeps growing, day by day and stuff like that. And so in other words, like kind of it doesn't exist without us, but yet at the same time, we're also like kind of very much, like kind of the recipient of the benefits and stuff like that, kind of.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
it's definitely a two-way street. And I think this is the thing that people don't necessarily realize, is the fact that, okay, it's taking information from us, but it's also, we're also being shaped by the internet. It's kind of a trippy concept, but, we're feeding the machine. The machine is kind of feeding us,
Yeah.
It's telling us what we should be worried about this week and things. So.
And so, of course, with the first Total Recall, we have at the center Arnold Schwarzenegger, aka the Terminator, and it's an interesting kind of take for him, because of the fact that, like, I think you mentioned about how involved he was with this, where that he basically like kind of pulled in Paul Verhoeven to be involved, and certainly we talked about him previously and about RoboCop and stuff. And one thing I did kind of like an observation I made and stuff like that was in the past few movies, like Running Man, Predator, and then this one, he had like Latino co-stars, and I just thought that was kind of an odd kind of coincidence that, like, the whole affair with the maid, right, and stuff. Patty wasn't, like, he hired the maid in 1991.
Wow.
So
yeah.
So it's kind of a weird kind of little coincidence and stuff. And we'll just leave it at that. We don't need to get too much into the whole affair.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah, I mean, Arnie just, he had, whatever you might think of him, I mean, he had a real kind of Midas touch for picking really good sci-fi and starring it. I mean, from what I understood, and he was like, he did production, he raised money for this, he pretty much had total control over this movie, and he said, I definitely want to work with Paul Verhoeven. Yeah. And I mean, they got Rob Bottin again to do the effects, so who better? Music by Jerry Goldsmith, who did a fantastic soundtrack. All over. It's kind of just like, you couldn't ask for a better kind of production crew, I don't think.
Definitely, and
and side note, it was shot in Mexico City, and apparently everyone got really bad food poisoning except for Arnie, who, of course, like, classic movie star, has all of his food shipped in a suitcase, and it's probably just protein shakes and things. So.
Right. Fire stay clear of
there.
And certainly, like, kind of along with, like, kind of, you mentioned some, big names and stuff like that. I mean, we've got Sharon Stone, like, kind of, like, this is Basic Instinct. Ronny Cox, who again came from RoboCop and stuff like that. And Michael Ironside, who in the future, besides Starship Troopers, working with Paul Verhoeven, he's also from the Death Wish remake and stuff. So just like, what it feels like is that, Arnie, like, kind of, like you said, besides the Midas touch, he was not going to, like, kind of skimp on things. And, so I feel like he kind of, like, packaged this all together, maybe in some ways and stuff with, the different people he worked with and everything. And then he was, like, kind of basically making it that, like, hey, if you're going to work on a, Arnold Schwarzenegger, project, you're going to get, like, kind of, some really top-notch talent and stuff.
Yeah. And speaking of sort of like not skimping on it, one of the things that's very, very noticeable about this in comparison to RoboCop is the product placement. Because, I think Bob Ager, another YouTuber, has a video on this. I haven't watched the whole thing, but makes a really good point. Like the product placement is front and center in Total Recall. It's just using like loads and loads of adverts from the time. And in a way, I mean, I'm guessing that was a great way to raise money, but it also kind of roots it very much in that time as well. And it kind of adds to this playing with your sort of sensibilities about this movie, and that you kind of know this is fake and it's a subjective experience, it's a movie, but at the same time you're just like, well, this is all the adverts and everything that's just around me. So it's kind of like, it really plays with this idea of, you like, you know, is this a fantasy, is this real, you know, is this really in the future, is it not? And it's kind of, you know, you could also read it as a kind of a cynical take on the movie industry in general. You could say, you know, we can't do this without all of these guys here, so buy a Coke, you know.
Yeah, I mean, there's some different layers of irony to that, because on the one hand, like you said, you know, it's everywhere, and you know, like kind of just there they are on Mars, right? And you're seeing like a Pepsi logo and stuff. So that seems like kind of in some ways the reality that we're headed, especially like kind of, you know, now with SpaceX kind of, you know, being involved in, you know, like kind of, and I can just imagine down the road that we'll see more and more kind of like sponsorships by different, you know, companies and stuff. And to me, like the ultimate irony for this movie though is the fact, like part of the whole point of it is that he's facing this kind of corporate, you know, kind of what's called with Ronny Cox, right, being the kind of the evil CEO. And so we have some, you know, kind of echoes of the RoboCop idea of that, like, you know, corporations being like kind of taking over things and stuff like that. And so, you know, here we have a movie with all that product placement, and meanwhile it's about this idea of fighting kind of like demand and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, previously, you know, in RoboCop, you've got taking over public services. This is like, this is what happens when a corporation takes over a planet. You know, they control the air supply.
That's crazy.
I mean, I think for me, the funniest thing about, I mean, there's a lot of funny moments as well in Total Recall, and it's another one where I would say more so than RoboCop, a way the humor is kind of dialed up in the most extreme ways. I mean, even the opening shot with Arnie rolling down a hill, smashing his sort of helmet, and just his eyes kind of like popping out of his skull. It kind of, again, I mean, it sets this standard of like, okay, in one way, this is him perhaps dreaming about his future, or is his future part of his dream or the past? And it sets up all of that. But it also sets up this other sort of expectation that living on Mars is a pretty stupid idea, right? You know, the slightest glass breaks and everybody dies, you know, and that's kind of reiterated all the way through. And I guess it's there to kind of provide tension and danger to all the people around you. But you can't help watching it thinking, yeah, like colonizing Mars is a fundamentally really dumb thing to do. But
and just to throw in a little science too, like I think one of the things that like it's funny how they kind of glossed over the very science of getting to Mars, which like if you do like a energy transfer, you know, it's just like kind of, you know, it's a risk of being geeky, you know, it takes you a year and a half, which is, you know, like kind of what the future plans for Mars expeditions is going to take, because otherwise, like, in fact, actually, even if you dialed up the speed, like unless you're like traveling like, you know, sublight or something like that, you're really not going to get there much faster or something like that. But meanwhile, like, you know, they just get there within like hours, you know, like at best days.
Just jump on the evening train to Mars. You know? It's simple. Well, that's another thing of like, you know, maybe that also kind of underpins maybe this is all just a complete fantasy, how you can warp your timelines maybe as well. But by the way, I wouldn't worry about the risk of seeming too nerdy. I think we've way past that threshold already, John. So yeah. The other thing I wanted to sort of throw your way was this idea that kind of occurred to me, because this is when I started sort of reading about Paul Verhoeven and watching RoboCop. You know, we have this idea of RoboCop as Jesus, kind of being resurrected and walking on water. I couldn't help noticing there were certain things when I was watching Total Recall. I thought, okay, you go to Mars, but why is it that like everyone is disfigured on Mars? You know, why have they got mutations there? You know, why is there also like, you know, a den of iniquity with sort of prostitutes everywhere? You know, why is that such a big sort of thing there? And I noticed it's called Venusville. And then I started thinking, you know, this is a guy that studied religious or Bible studies at university. Is Mars hell in Total Recall? When you think about it, there's like, you know, people being tortured,
Yeah.
temptation, violence, murder,
Right.
all this kind of stuff. Is kind of Mars some sort of metaphysical hell for our everyman Arnie character? Right. I don't know. It's just something,
or at least purgatory. Because certainly, it's the idea that like you're in this kind of state in between and stuff like that. Because I guess I'm trying to think of like what heaven would be then in that situation. Certainly, I guess
blue skies on Mars.
Right. Ultimately, yeah.
Yeah.
And otherwise, like, the hell is like kind of, just basically, I guess, getting sucked out and kind of, exploding.
Eyes popping out your head. Yeah. Yeah, it was just, I just couldn't understand why you needed all of these elements in a story that was just about going to Mars.
Right.
It's not like when you watch Moon, it's not like there's, people being murdered and disfigured on the moon or something like that. It was just kind of something that's kind of occurred to me, but yeah, I mean, I guess the main thing is really this idea of, is he or isn't he actually hallucinating, or is it fancy or is it not?
That's my question to you too. Like, kind of, what are your thoughts on kind of, like, is the ending real in the end? And, of course, major spoilers always and stuff like that. Or was this all the kind of, because there's this theories different times with discussion about it that, like, there's different clues pointing to the fact that, like, this could all be an illusion and stuff. This could all be the actual, like, kind of the recall experience and everything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I watched it when I was 14, I thought it was real, and I thought, oh, well, this is, he's like, when you notice the bead of sweat, that's him. That's the mean. That means it's real. Watching it again, I think he's definitely under the recall program, and it's gone wrong, and he's about to be lobotomized. Reason being, the reason being. I mean, one, you get all the clues in when he goes in to have the consultation. They say,
that's where it's all about.
It's a side note, blue skies on Mars. Oh, haven't heard that one before. Yeah, and it formulates his sort of dream of Melina up on the screen beforehand. He wants, there's all this kind of stuff that he wants to do. Everything that gets described to him happens. So that kind of underscores that for me. And also, there's also this thing, everything is amped up to 11 in the whole movie. It's like the violence is like amped up. He seems to sort of unknowingly be able to do superhuman feats of violence and, and saves the day and everything else, which for me just sort of thinks, this probably is. But the interesting thing is, I went into it, knowing that this probably is him being manipulated, but we still want to follow him on the journey, and we still want to see him kick the bad guys' asses, because I think that represents something, in our daily lives. I think we feel manipulated by various forces, and we also would like to feel that we can get out of these loops and fight against them. And, say bullshit to people and, call people out and stuff like this. So I think it's weird in that, it's probably not real, but you still want to kind of go for the ride, which also is kind of what movies are about anyway. We know they're all subjective. Right. But we still want to watch them anyway, And
this is a theme that, like, we've covered on, like, Westworld. This is a theme that, like, is definitely, like, kind of really pretty much... You have, just different times, like the Matrix, right? Where this feeling that, in your ordinary life, you're actually this kind of super being and stuff like that. One of the other best, movies that kind of really exemplifies this is The Long Kiss Goodnight, which is not a, like, big movie, but it's actually one with Samuel L. Jackson and Gina Davis. And basically, she's this kind of housewife who, like, at some point, she kind of starts waking up to this reality, that she's the super spy and stuff that has, like, and that's part of the humor is that, like, she discovers that she can kind of, like, throw a knife and, like, hit a fly, like, so, like, these different movies all kind of have the same idea that, like, we have these hidden talents that we only discover by accident and stuff, and then it starts to, reawaken us to the fact that, like, and even Harry Potter, right? That's part of the other kind of, so I feel like there's a whole genre of, like, kind of this hero kind of discovering, and even I guess one of our favorites, Luke Skywalker, Star Wars.
Yeah, absolutely.
Discovering he's actually a Jedi, that kind of.
Totally, yeah. Tapping into a kind of like a hidden heroism, yeah. But I mean, I think what's funny about this is that they actually describe this new technology as an ego trip.
Right.
It's like, this is clearly a power fantasy. You've got like Arnie, just like this sort of huge, sort of muscular dude just tearing people to pieces. And, I mean, if anything is like a celluloid power trip, then I don't know what is. It's got to be Total Recall in that respect anyway.
Definitely. And you and I've talked about how like this is definitely like was a strong Arnie vehicle, right? Like where totally. like it feels like an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, kind of it's got, and I feel like Paul Verhoeven kind of really in this one didn't quite take a total backseat, but he kind of really like he kind of knew what he was working with, and he kind of like amped it up, like at different times where he can kind of have the Arnie one-liners and stuff. He really just kind of like he knew what he was working with. He was kind of going for it. Yeah,
no, I mean they're just a match made in heaven from my perspective. But I mean, the reason it's so effective is that unlike the Terminator, where he doesn't really speak and it's just his presence really, and likewise in Conan as well.
Right.
The difference with this one is that he plays the everyman who's being manipulated by everyone around him. And that makes you identify with him much more strongly than you ever had before with any of his previous movies. And that's why and actually he plays on that quite a lot in a lot of his future movies. I would say True Lies is another one where he's really like this sort of, an everyday guy who kind of just gets, thrown into a situation. I'm sure there's others as well, but I just can't think of them at the moment. But yeah, that's what makes this one a real kind of breakout for him. And I think it was probably one of his most successful movies at that, or his most successful to date at that point.
Definitely. With Sharon Stone too, like I think what's funny with her is that she thinks she did some kind of other kind of B movies before that, and I feel like this is one of the movies that kind of really launched her stardom and stuff like that. She really kind of does a good job of playing like kind of this I don't know, trophy wife, I guess, in some ways and stuff. And it kind of really plays up the idea that, here's this kind of ordinary guy with this kind of gorgeous wife and, really like, why would he kind of want to leave this reality and stuff like that, right? Like, in other words, he's got a pretty nice life. Like, on the one hand, kind of doing construction isn't exciting and stuff like that. But meanwhile, like when you have a hot wife like Sharon Stone, like, what's to keep you from kind of, wanting to just be kind of pretty quote unquote satisfied and stuff.
Yeah. No, I think she's a really interesting character in this one. And again, we're kind of like following on from the legacy of Lewis in RoboCop in that she's not only like she's quite complicated in that she's not only having to sort of put up this facade to keep him sort of ensnared in his reality, but she's also the wife of Michael Ironside.
Right.
So somehow Cohaagen has persuaded this married couple to make her sort of sleep with Arnie to keep him in this reality. That's how powerful Cohaagen is. Right. But also the fact that she as a character kind of believably balances these two relationships is really a sort of testament to her acting chops as well. I thought it's, and of course she's all the physicality of having to sort of fight and do stuff and be pretty sort of menacing as well. She does a really great job in it.
Yeah, I don't know of any other ones where she kind of is nearly as physical as in Total Recall. No. Like she really like kind of pulls out the stops and.
She probably did some sort of action vehicle at some point in her career, and we've just forgotten about it. But not too many. But I mean, you can definitely see why he chose her for Basic Instinct, because she could sort of keep you. On the edge of seat of knowing, is she someone good, bad, what her motives are and things like this. But yeah, really interesting. I thought as well that the interesting thing for me is this is one of the first movies of the late 80s, I would say, that really takes this look at, and you see this obviously with The Matrix and other movies that come through the 90s, this idea of questioning, what is the reality around us,
right.
And this is really the first one I can think of that really tries to keep you in that state of suspense where you don't know, is this real or is this not real?
Right.
And, you know, you just have to look at things like Inception and various other things that came after it for very kind of similar sort of plays for stories. But yeah,
and it's funny how like the term greenlighting has been around even before this movie and stuff, but I think it's only been in recent history that it's kind of become more of, you know, I don't know, for some reason that like it's been used more often. But, you know, certainly that's one of the things that like we really have here too, that like, you know, Arnie's being told like, you know, oh, you know, this is all your imagination, you know, like kind of, you know, you're not really like kind of in this, you're not really a spy, and you know, like, and so, you know, and here's, you know, kind of this guy, like you said, an ordinary man who, like, you know, he kind of goes, well, maybe this is like, you know, my, you know, maybe I am back in the recall machine, and oh, this is my fantasy, stuff like that. And you kind of really feel that like, you know, and like you said, you're questioning what is reality and stuff like that along with them.
Yeah, and what's good about this is that you get reminders or markers all the way through the movie. It's like when he goes into the recall, you've already seen what you're going to experience, but then you also get, you know, the wife questioning the motives. You get the doctor coming back and questioning the motives later on. You then at the end you get the, you know, the motives of whether this was all real or not, and so they cleverly weave this into the story. And from what I understood, they went to great lengths to try and make both possibilities as conceivable as possible when they're doing the story. So yeah, I would say a lot of other movies don't walk that balance quite so finely, i.e. the remake. But Inception's another good one that keeps you kind of on that precipice the entire way through the movie.
Right. Yeah, I mean, certainly, you know, we kind of mentioned the Matrix and stuff. I mean, you find it fairly early on. I mean, it's not quite like really. I'd say it's probably right. It's what breaks into the act 2 and stuff like that. Because at that point, then it's Neo deciding to kind of, you know, that everything else from then on is going to be acting on that reality and stuff. Whereas for this one, like you said, we're kind of, you know, like Arnie is basically like kind of, you know, all along the way is trying to figure out whether he's Quaid or if he's this kind of, you know, agent and stuff like that. And even like you said, almost like kind of right up to the ending, you know, like there's him talking to himself and saying, you know, oh, you know, like now since you've made it, you know, like kind of, you can kind of see that this has all been part of our plan for you to kind of get here. And so, yeah, it really plays with your mind that like, you know, like kind of, because yeah, we have the fantasy versus reality and stuff like that, but it's also like kind of, you know, is he the fact this, you know, spy that's kind of working, you know, with you know, Cohaagen and the plot and stuff like that, or is he in fact, you know, actually Quaid who, you know, kind of wants to help the rebellion and stuff like that. So that's the other kind of thing that he can't really decide for himself as well.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Yeah, we have the fantasy versus reality and stuff like that, but it's also like kind of, you know, is he the fact this, you know, spy that's kind of working, you know, with you know, Cohaagen and the plot and stuff like that, or is he in fact, you know, actually Quaid who, you know, kind of wants to help the rebellion and stuff like that. So that's the other kind of thing that he can't really decide for himself as well.
Yeah, or is he, to be more precise, is he the Hauser that turned against Cohaagen, or is he the Hauser that is still with Cohaagen?
Right.
And yeah, and it's kind of cool. And you've also got that questioning: is this reality? Is this not? Or is he a double agent? Or is he not? You know, there's a lot of sort of layers in there about his allegiances and motivations, which are really cool. And the other thing I find that's really the thing that really underpins the whole kind of ego trip power fantasy more about this than other ones that have come after it is that, like in the Matrix, and you'll notice as well, there's a red pill in this that he's been told to take by the doctors, which they obviously kind of stole. but his life isn't that bad when he's the normal guy, right? Normally in this, like in the Matrix, once he takes the pill, he realizes what a terrible situation the planet's in. It's awful. Even in the remake, there's this thing of like everyday life is pretty grim, really. and it's kind of has a more of escapism, whereas this is like, well, his life's pretty good. He's really just kind of, it's more like he's just bored and he wants something extra. So I think it's almost like a kind of that's why it kind of ties into this idea of almost justifying this extramarital affair that may or may not be like totally, justified or not. It's kind of, it's much more interesting in that respect, I think, because it's not like, both worlds seem quite okay.
And I think that's the other thing that's interesting different times too, right? Is this idea of, like why do we have a fantasy? Like kind of if in fact, like you said, your life is good, stuff like that. What is it that kind of still drives us, right? To kind of do something kind of like, that's risky, inherently stuff like, an extra matter of fact. In fact, part of, I think, sometimes the attraction of a fair is this fantasy aspect that it's like, here's like your ordinary life and your normal life and stuff like that. And here's like this relationship that isn't quite real because, like kind of none of your friends really know about it, and never mind your spouse and stuff like that. So just between you and then so it's kind of like you're kind of off on an island, like kind of away from your, regular reality of dealing with like, poopy diapers and kind of, ordinary life stuff like that. But meanwhile, in this life, you could be whoever and like, you don't have to deal with any of your other reality and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think that's why this kind of, in some respects, sort of talks much more fundamentally to the human experience than one where it's an obvious escape from some sort of dire situation. Yeah, it's an interesting one. The other thing I wanted to mention, just because it was really interesting for me, was the architecture or the interior decor. And I don't know, this is the product of filming in Mexico City at that time, but a lot of the interiors are kind of like these very kind of sparse concrete interiors, and I just think, wow, this is like a trend now. It's like, it was a really interesting view of what future housing would be like. And he nailed it, I think, in that respect. Maybe not quite so much big hair, but yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, like, there's, other than the architecture, there's definitely lots of signs of the 80s in terms of big hair and other fashion trends and stuff. It seemed like every other guy was wearing a members only jacket for most of the time and stuff. But it's interesting they chose Mexico City as the what's called architecture of the future, because as we talked about with Planet of the Apes, they had Irvine and kind of like, American cities and stuff. So it's interesting they chose a, Latin American city. And I mean, and I wouldn't have, to be honest, I wouldn't have thought of in that time period, Mexico City as kind of being like kind of more advanced looking and stuff.
Yeah, and that's, I've been to Mexico City. There's some pretty interesting architecture around the place here and there. So yeah, very kind of brutalist concrete though.
I mean, in my mind, I think of like somewhere like Mexico City is like kind of, the old kind of, Spanish mission churches and that kind of things, stuff like that, like very, very much like kind of things that like are like the signs of like kind of it's historical kind of reflection and stuff. But I guess I'm not as aware of kind of all the things that are more part of like which I imagine is like part of the more modern architecture.
Yeah, I mean, I was around the financial center, and apart from the places where obviously you're going to kind of go and eat and things like this, it was kind of a concrete jungle, a lot of big sort of concrete buildings. Some of them, depending on your attitude towards that, some of them quite interesting, but So yes, well, I guess talking of buildings that are, sort of unpredictable and kind of go everywhere, we should move on to the 2012 remake. Right,
and I think what's most interesting to me is that like it's starts off pretty much, you have like this sense of that, like you're almost watching like Blade Runner, where like kind of that's like kind of what they were going for, and I think they really achieved it. And then other than that though, like which seems to be like kind of like any of the night scenes, that's what you had stuff. But then during the day, it becomes this kind of very much a saturated kind of I don't know, like almost like kind of a stand-in for the city of the future. Like in other words, it's kind of like you either had the kind of LA of Blade Runner, or you had this kind of like the city that like, you know, you see like, what was that other movie that Minority Report or any other kind of sci-fi movie set in this kind of, you know, generic future.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of with the floating cars, it reminded me of Minority Report or, you know, iRobot with Will Smith or something like that, you know. But yeah, it was kind of, I couldn't really keep track of which one was England and which one was Australia.
No, yeah.
But yeah, they were very different during the day. And I mean, it started off very sort of dark and dingy and rainy, which I suppose is what England is like. And you know, all the buildings are also, I don't know why you would build buildings that all built into each other everywhere, and then had lots of very convenient escape routes to kind of slide out of. Do this. It's like the buildings were almost, I mean, they looked pretty cool. I actually quite liked the apartment. It looked awesome, but yeah, they just didn't. I don't really understand the practical implications of the architecture. But
and apparently Brexit was the salvation, right? Because Britain's apparently the only thing left on that side of the world.
Doubters take note, you see. It's just Australia. But this is the other, I mean, I'll get onto this later, but this is what made me laugh about this, because there's, you know, thematically, you would have thought the rest of the world has been destroyed. There's just England and Australia left, and this weird train that goes through the middle of the earth. We'll leave that for now.
Okay.
And then they destroy the train at the end, and this is like, yay, we've killed all the oppressors, and you know, we're now economically free. No, you've just cut off yourself from the rest of the last remaining people on the planet. You know, why is this such a great thing? And I thought this is almost like some kind of weird Trumpian wet dream. It's like you can justify an extramarital affair, and you can isolate your country from all the nasty foreigners in the process. I don't know. I didn't quite get it. But then I started thinking about this. This really bugged me when I was watching it. Why is there a train going through the middle of the earth? Why the hell have they got this thing? And then I thought, you know, what, you know, why would the transport not be possible by ship or air or anything else? Maybe not. And then I realized exactly why there is a train going through the middle of the earth in this movie. It's because Inception came out 2 years before, and they wanted to have scenes where people were floating around and shooting each other. And they also wanted to basically rip off Inception. So you don't know what's real, you don't know what's fake. And then they threw in, you know, you can rip off Memento as well at the same time, because it's kind of it uses the whole memory thing. So, you know, you can rip off a few kind of Christopher Nolan movies
all at once
with this vehicle, all in one train ride.
And so, I guess then they didn't have to deal with like kind of the question of like, you know, why does it take only, you know, minutes to get to Mars and stuff? So
exactly, yeah, no, I mean, I think everyone knew that, you know, traveling to Mars within the space of a movie is bullshit. So they went with that. No, I mean, this is like what I'm going to coin this term like a classic hybrid cash grab remake. Because on one hand, you're kind of grabbing cash from people because it's a remake, and on the other hand, you're grabbing cash because you're like following a trend of something that came out a couple of years before that was really successful. Double whammy, you know, that studio execs will just buy that up. And let's not forget, this is from Len Wiseman, the guy who's made almost entire career of directing underworld movies. With Kate Beckinsdale, no less. So.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, though, like kind of because other than Colin Farrell, I mean, you know, Kate Beckinsdale is like featured very prominently here, and you know, unlike the original where like the wife dies after like at least the halfway point or whatever, but here like, you know, she's fighting to the very end.
Fighting past the point that makes any logical sense as well. You know, your leader's gone. Like, why are you still trying to pursue this? You've got absolutely nothing to gain by trying to restore his memory. You know, unless it's like some deep-seated hatred of foreigners. I'm starting to see a theme here with this movie. Yeah, I don't know. And also, one thing I did want to point out, I'm going to start. I mean, this is one thing I don't actually like it when people objectively pick plot holes in movies, but I'm going to do it anyway in this one because it's such a bad remake. Okay. But I mean, this is set in Australia, and there's not a single Australian in the whole movie.
Right.
There's like, where have all the Australians gone?
Well, apparently, all the foreigners took over Asia. Like from Asia, kind of took over Australia. I mean, that's probably one of the worst fears, right? Of you know. The Australian people and stuff. So it's been realized.
Those dang Asians on the train taking over. Yeah. I mean, it's and that. I mean, also in terms of weak plot points, you've got one train, one single source of an invasion. It's really not going to be hard to stop that invasion, is it? And how many soldiers can you really put on there? And from what we've seen, these sentient cops aren't particularly threatening. It seems like most Colin Farrell, all 5'10" of him, can take down a massive robotic cop with no problem at all, as come Kate Beckinsdale, who already weighs like 50 pounds less than him. They're not a big threat, really. They kind of, but anyway. All right, enough of that.
Yeah, I was going to say though that like it's interesting we have in Gint's case, instead of this kind of creature that has this kind of mutation. In fact, that's one of the things that's interesting. It's a big change from the original. Is that besides Mars and stuff, it's the fact that like rather than having mutations, everybody looks kind of fabulous. And in fact,
yes.
You have besides Kate Beckinsdale, the other woman. I'm trying to remember her name in this one.
It's Jessica Biel, but I can't remember the name of the character. Yeah, it's gone.
And we have Bryan Cranston as Cohaagen and stuff, which is kind of an interesting choice too, because here he's playing very much like kind of the cartoon villain and stuff like that. And,
yeah, it's not really. I don't think it's his strength really. I think he's much better when he's got a much more complicated character and he's got some sort of grey area for you to possibly identify with and stuff. It's a very kind of one-dimensional character really. Yeah. Unfortunately, but I'm sure he got paid well for it, so good on him.
I think that's the thing that sometimes with projects like this is probably very much, I think you hit the nail on the head about saying that, it's a crash grab, not only for like kind of, the production, but also I think for the different actors, they kind of know what they're getting into and stuff. And
yeah, I mean, you could sort of say it tried to do this thing about colonization in that, they changed Australia from Australia to the colony, right? Which was kind of like a weird thing, and no mention of any kind of royals ruling over England and seizing control or anything. But then it kind of like it doesn't really show you any of the real downsides of colonization, like people being dehumanized or suffering. Both sides seem to be kind of okay, really. Right. So that any statement on that kind of loses any impact as well.
Why were the rebels so upset in this one? I mean that's something that like I mean other than like kind of this plot to kind of basically have all these robots and stuff, which is like kind of similar to the OCP idea and stuff like that. I mean I really didn't see, like you said, like kind of what was like kind of the point.
I didn't really see what's bad architecture. That's about all you could complain about, really. Not enough glow in the dark tattoos. I mean, it didn't seem too bad. That could always be the tagline for Total Recall. The future. It could be worse. I don't know. It's I didn't really get it.
And then another kind of interesting change though is like Recall is now like in this kind of or massage parlor and stuff instead of a lab.
I mean, I was initially sort of like interested, so I was looking at it and it's got sort of lots of temple structures, and I thought maybe there's like a sort of a hidden religious kind of spiritual element to this movie, but that soon dissipated. It was just because it looked cool, I guess.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, they tried to, I guess they sort of briefly touched on this idea of, a robot police force, but they didn't really explore any of the moral quandaries that would come up from a police force that was you know, unlike RoboCop, which looks at it in lots of different ways,
right.
this was very lightly touched on. You know, I mean, I think it was basically the main statements or the main messages of this movie was, don't make your policemen into robots and don't let your government do fake terrorism, basically. And live in the moment. That's right, live in the moment. That's the other message. Yeah. Oh, and the thing that I really, when they mentioned that the whole reason they were trying to escape and get him, because he had a box in his head that he had to like give to someone for the code. They never showed that box. They never did the whole Arnie pulling the box out because it was PG-13, I guess. But, and also I had thought, please, come on. They can't just have one kill switch for every single automated policeman. And I'm glad later on they said, you know, only an idiot would think there's just like one code that's going to disable all the robots. And I was like, oh, thank God for that. It's not that dumb, at least. So, but yeah.
Yeah, and
they did have... Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, you know, Bill Nighy was a interesting kind of. I mean, granted, he didn't have much, you know, kind of airtime and stuff like that, but he was the kind of, I guess, the leader that, you know, in this case, again, as we kind of mentioned, instead of being like kind of a mutant stuff, he's kind of like, I guess, the stand-in of the British kind of esteemed kind of actor that is basically just stands in as a leader, I guess.
Desperately trying to add some credibility to this movie.
Right,
yeah.
right.
Well, no, he's the stand-in for the leader of the werewolves, which is what he is in Underworld.
Oh, right. So, of course, I didn't think about that. Yes.
Yeah, so we've got like Bryan Cranston would be the vampires and Bill Nighy would be the werewolves. So, yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think it's. I mean, they did sort of. The only bit that I actually rewatched a few times just to make sure I didn't miss anything subtle was the bit where you've got. I know, right? Bit where he actually goes into recall and gets the drugs administered. Because I was wondering if they were going to give you lots of sort of teasers for what was going to happen to the rest of the story. And he kind of says, oh, you know, you might be like a double agent for Cohaagen. So they kind of mention it in that. But there's a whole lot of waffle about, you know, brains are just, you know, what is illusion? And, you know, we're all just chemicals and it's just our perception of it. And he's there saying, but, you know, no matter what, illusion is just an illusion. But he says, but subjectively, it feels much more interesting. So, yeah, but there wasn't really anything else than that.
And then, of course, like, you know, as you pointed to, like, they had to kind of throw in their Inception moment, you know, major spoiler, that he kind of has to look at his arm and see that the tattoo is missing and stuff. So.
Yeah. I mean, it was like, I mean, whereas the original constantly keeps you guessing during the movie, this one, it's just like, it's an action movie. And then right at the end, it's just like, oh, it's all a dream. And that's, you know, with also the weird twist that, you know, Kate Beckinsdale, for no reason whatsoever, tries to leads to his memory. So yeah,
I think the biggest flaw to me is the fact that like it just lacks the humor that basically like that in the original. Paul Verhoeven totally like he does things over the top, but he kind of does it where you like it's this awareness that like. The humor is just to emphasize the fact that like this is so far-fetched and stuff, and we're not like trying to make serious, you know, like kind of you know, Oscar performances and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of very self-aware and it's kind of like, you know, giving it as it is or what it is and stuff like that. But this one and the remake, I don't know. I guess they were trying to do something that kind of, you know, really had some statement and like, you know, I feel like, you know, we've talked before about Black Christmas and stuff like that. I feel like there were probably some statements they were trying to make, but then in the end, they end up not doing a very fun kind of movie and stuff. I mean, it's action-packed, but yet it just lacks that kind of, you know.
But I should point out that all the action involves masses of CGI, so it lacks any kind of real weight. The only scenes that really kind of have any impact are Kate Beckinsdale fighting, really.
Yeah. She does that well, though. So we have to give lots of credit there.
Yeah, she does a good job. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that the reason it works better and why it's more interesting and entertaining in Paul Verhoeven's is that you have to remember this whole thing is an ego trip. And if you notice, whenever Arnie punches someone, it's almost like he punches them to death. It's like he punches someone and blood sprays. And so it's this really kind of like over-exaggerated violence that's almost comical. And like the bit where they're on the stairs where someone tries to shoot him and he holds up someone as a shield. And then they're just there riddling and he's shooting back behind this meat shield. And then he turns around and the meat shield gets pumped full of more bullets. And then the meat shield gets thrown down and people trample over it. I mean, that's just... Yeah, it's just really funny.
And then it's punctuated too by the Arnie one-liners, like, consider this a divorce, kind of,
exactly,
so the stuff that like really kind of, that we've kind of come to know as like kind of the McBain character, right? And stuff that like is spoofed in The Simpsons.
Yeah, and I mean, there's nothing of that. And I would say one of the most tedious parts of this movie is when he's just escaped with Jessica Biel and he goes back to his own apartment. And I mean, there's about 3 minutes of him cutting plastic around his apartment and playing on the piano so that he can find the one piano key that will unlock a message, a message that's really stupid anyway. And it's just like, oh, God,
but they hired
really?
Ethan Hawke though to give the message.
I know, right?
just to give the message. So that was an interesting choice too. Like, I mean, Ethan Hawke, like, we've certainly talked about him, of course, and Pelham 1, 2, 3, and stuff like that. He's a really good actor, and you have him coming in. I guess that's part of the point of cameos is like you get great actors just that come in for like kind of their one day rate, I guess, and stuff. But it just kind of, I don't know. I guess I almost wish that like they had done something more with him, and like even if it was more kind of holograms or something, like kind of
Yeah, I mean, I think there's nothing. What's interesting is, I mean, okay, there's violence, there's action in the original, but it then sort of, you're constantly questioning the motivations of the characters. It's like, should Quaid trust the mutants? Which mutants should he trust? What has he got to learn from these mutants? What's the big secret? What's Richter going to do? What's his relationship? Who's going to get, is Cohaagen going to kill them? In this one, it's just like he's running away from some bad guys, and he just keeps running and running and running and running, and then it's the end of the movie. And they blow up the train. There's really nothing. There's no human interaction between these characters to really sort of. I mean, they find Bill Nye's character and they kill him, and his daughter gets upset. But there's been so little kind of relationship building between the daughter and the main character, or this, if there has, it's very uninspiring character building, let's put it that way. There's much more interesting a relationship between Sharon Stone and Arnie in Total Recall than there is between those two. But so it just falls flat on a lot of things, really.
And Total Recall at its heart, I think, at least the original, is this thriller, which, like you said, has these different questions that, kind of that you are kind of left guessing for most of the movie. Whereas in this remake, it's an action movie. That's pure and simple what it is. I mean, it's just really, I mean, the only suspense is like whether they'll make the jump and stuff like that, or whether kind of, and I don't know, like how much, despite the great acting, in terms of the action part, you really feel like kind of like, Colin Farrell is going to walk out of this fight, or he's going to walk out of that fight and stuff like that. So I just feel like there just wasn't enough, kind of suspense in any of those, moments and stuff.
No. Yeah, I mean, to be fair, he did a reasonable enough job with what he was given. I thought he was,
right.
certainly trying. I mean, most of the actors did, really. It's just you can only work with what you're given, really, I think is the case with this one.
But also, I feel like kind of he's, this is like kind of, we talked about this before about the MTV effect, right? And so here you have like these attractive cast, right? Colin Farrell, Jessica Biel, and stuff like that. And it just feels like kind of just walked, off the runway from, to the latest premiere and onto this set and stuff, and they're just onto another one and stuff after this probably.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the funniest bits for me was when Kate Beckinsdale is sort of deriding him, saying, what do you think that you could ever have a woman like me, you lowly sort of person? yeah, now just go and run back to Jessica Biel, you low life. You know, it was just. Yeah, the other line that really cracked me up in this movie was the bit where he first sees Hauser, and Hauser says, "Okay, so what you got to do is there's something in your brain. You got to have this kill code. We can unlock. We can destroy all the other robots." And Colin Farrell's expression was like, "Come again?" And that's actually how he delivered that line. It was like taking a piss. That made me laugh. I appreciated that little hint of realism. The only thing I thought was kind of clever and cool was the SWAT team when they have the flying eyeball that they shoot through the door, and it just sort of scatters the cameras everywhere so they can build a 3D image. I thought, oh yeah, I can see that happening. That was the only kind of technology thing that I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, certainly for overall production value, I mean, you can clearly see, where they put the budget. It's, like kind of just, I mean, despite the fact that like it's kind of generic in some different ways, but it certainly kind of like, looks very kind of, I mean, it's despite the dystopian aspect and everything, it seemed like it'd be a pretty cool place to live. Like, kind of like, I mean, just, in spite of the kind of, on the one hand, the darker kind of Blade Runner kind of association, stuff like that. But other than that, I mean, it looks like kind of just very much like, like a kind of it's kind of a cool future, flying cars and.
I can tell you one major pitfall of this future. Everything is kind of connected and like all undulating.
Right.
And I just thought this is going to be like a free climber's dream. There's going to be loads of YouTubing guys who are just like climbing on and just like, hey, look at me, I'm on Big Ben, and then just climb off and go over to London Bridge and things like this. So I thought that'd be a lot of fun. You could just climb around that city endlessly.
But I can tell you though, like coming from my commercial inspection background, it's got to be like a maintainer's nightmare. Just like when you have that many more moving parts for your typical building, just to get around from point A to point B and stuff like that. I just can't imagine what the expenses are just maintaining infrastructure like that.
Well, that was the thing as well. It looked very expensive, a lot of this world. And considering like most of the planet is now uninhabitable, you would have thought people have been a little more modest with their aspirations, perhaps.
Nope.
But also there's that scene where they're kind of trapped in the tube with the square things that were like flying along, or the cubes that had no windows. I don't know what they were, but they were moving backwards and forwards at very unpredictable velocities in various different directions, presumably controlled by AI. But how on earth would you ever fix one of those? It's just, there's a magnetic cube that's stuck in sector G in the middle of the air. Like, what do? You had to go and hang glide over to it to fix it. There was a lot of things that I had issues with in this. I think because in some respects it seemed, a lot of the life seemed very basic and some of it seemed very sophisticated, but I couldn't really see how the two would mesh together very well in a workable society, let's say.
Well, overall, I think, it's this is definitely one of those kind of cases that like we have a remake that nobody asked for and really makes you wonder, like, other than the cash grab, why would you, do this stuff? But if kind of as we've seen, unfortunately, again and again, it's no doubt, a sign of like things yet to come of other kind of revisits of popular 80s kind of sci-fi and then other, horror movies and stuff as well.
I thought the RoboCop remake fared much better, at least, in that it had more thought-provoking themes. This really didn't have much to think about.
No.
But, yeah.
And coming up, we couldn't resist, so we're going to also include Showgirls as one of the Paul Verhoeven looks that we'll be discussing. And then coming up after that, we'll be looking at the Watchmen series as well. And an interesting connection that we just discovered recently with The Incredibles. So those are kind of some of the upcoming episodes. So once again, I'm John Chang with Dan Edmonds. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.